get started? All right, welcome to the cinematic influences on the television show Game of Thrones. We will skip over any issues that we have with book adaptations. We're just talking about the filmatic influences that the show utilizes in the series. I'm Rebecca. I am one of the moderators from the History of Westeros Facebook group. I am a professional film editor. I mostly do documentary work. I did a series called Heirloom. It's about tomatoes. It's just like Game of Thrones, but with tomatoes.
My name is Tomas Papas. I am a moderator for History of Westeros as well. Nothing really special about me. I kind of piggybacked onto this panel when I heard Sean and Rebecca talking about it, and I'll talk a little bit about my journey through research on this. But that's it for me.
I'm Sean. I'm one of the podcasters, YouTubers for History of Westeros, and I'm just a big fan of film and Game of Thrones, and I'm excited to draw these parallels here.
Cool. We'll start with Sean. He's got some really good stuff for you, starting with the scene that you guys have started to see quite a bit.
So one cool thing about this panel is that we just get to show stuff we know you already like.
Shep is somebody that we all really like.
Oh, there we go. Now we'll get there. To move to the right moment. Stand by one more moment.
Podrick.
So while we're looking for the right minute here, because a lot of these clips, it's like we have the clip, we have the scene, but it's like a 5-minute scene, and we just want to show you 30 seconds. If we try to show all these scenes, It's going to be too long for this whole panel.
Podrick.
Yeah.
Where are the horses?
So there's a movie, Rob Roy. Anyone here see Rob Roy or remember that movie? Yeah. It came out the same year as Braveheart.
Figure eight,
and it was kind of overshadowed. Braveheart, one of Best Pictures, a bigger production. And since the stars of both those movies have put their feet in their mouths. But Rob Roy was a similar story. You had this common, character being oppressed by the nobility, basic idea of the story, and he's trying to stand up to them, one man against the whole system or whatever. And in my opinion, and I think a lot of people agree that there's this sword fight between Liam Neeson and Tim Roth that, if it's not the best, it's like top three sword fights in film history. And one thing it was good, one thing I particularly appreciated about it, and a thing that I always appreciate when it's done in film is presented more realistically. A lot of times fighting and combat stuff in movies, it's really flashy. It's not very realistic.
Podrick.
And part of that maybe is just the actors aren't experts at these weapons. Part of it is maybe kind of expectations from audiences. We just want to see people punch each other in the face back and forth. But the reality is when you get punched in the face, you don't just punch it. You get knocked, you get dizzy, it hurts your face, your nose pounds, you bleed, but it's not as fun to see the heroes ow, how you hit me, but that's what would happen if you've ever bumped your head or something when you fell. It's jarring, and I suppose maybe experienced fighters get more used to that and can take a couple hits to the head, but in reality, professional fighters, expert fighters, they don't land many blows. When they do, that's the end usually. You know what I mean? You get your professional boxers, they're mostly blocking, and they throw 80 punches and hit 4 of them, And in the fight with Rob Roy, which may be a difference in these two scenes, is it's these incremental, minor little edges that Rob Roy is getting over, or that Tim Roth's character is getting over Liam Neeson's character. That he's definitely a better swordsman, but the way he's a better swordsman isn't that he like slams down harder and does 14 somersaults. Is that every now and then he gets a little slice on the arm, and he's not even winded. Rob Roy's character's like puffing and puffing, trying to keep his sword up, and Rob Roy's just kind of like, you ready for the next round? But he's just barely better than him, and these little minor little edges of skill add up over the series of the fights, till eventually Rob Roy is just defeated.
My father.
And he's on the ground, Tim Roth arrogantly, sword in his face. And it's very similar, that moment is very similar to the moment between the Hound and Brienne. Most of the Hound and Brienne, they're just smashing each other back and forth. They keep hitting each other in the face with these metal gauntlets that really should be causing severe brain damage. But it's about the clash of wills. It's symbolic of the clash of wills and the might of these two characters.
I'm Brienne of Tarth, this is Podrick Payne.
And for the moment, we might just have to watch this scene until we get to that key image. I'm sure you don't mind that much watching this scene from Game of Thrones. It was a pretty powerful scene, a pretty frustrating scene right here. I don't know about you guys, but I had this sinking feeling when I realized there should have been this reunion that we're waiting for, this time for moment, finally, forces coming together.
But if you're watching the show currently, right, there's a nice, pretty beautiful callback to this moment in the last episode where, you have Arya asking the Hound why he's in Winterfell. Like, why are you here? Basically implying, you guys talk about in the episode that he's a selfish person. He just looks out for himself. He's in the last place that you would find someone who's solely preoccupied with their own self-interest. And he says,
I'm not paid by the
I fought for you, didn't I?
No.
And I thought about this scene and recently did a rewatch. This is one of the more painful scenes for me to watch because I don't think I'm alone. You have a lot of show watchers who are favorite characters are Brienne and the Hound. And you see these two characters who
Tell me that's not Lannister gold.
in this scene they both have the best intentions, right?
Jamie Lannister gave
the Hound
me the
is
sword.
he wants to protect Arya and thinks that
I
Brienne's
swore to your mother by the old
I don't care what you
Brienne sees the
thought.
Hound and knows his
The girl.
backstory.
She's not coming with you.
She is.
It makes sense for them to not trust each other, but we
You're
know
not a
better.
good listener. Valyrian steel. I always wanted some Valyrian steel.
Come with me, Arya. I'll take you to safety.
Safety? Where the fuck's that? Her auntie Nere's dead. Her mother's dead. Her father's dead. Her brother's dead. Winterfell is a pile of rubble. There's no safety, you dumb bitch. You don't know that by now. You're the wrong one to watch over her.
And that's what you're doing. Watching over her.
Aye, that's what I'm doing.
Another comment that I can make here. We see a little bit more of the difference in the fight in the other scene from Rob Roy. These are both basically two big, strong characters with big, heavy swords and armor. You remember the scene where the Hound is kind of mocking Arya a little bit when she's practicing her water dancer, and she tells the story about Syrio and Maren Trant. He kind of scoffs at the idea. Oh, Syrio's the best swordsman. Oh, he didn't have his sword even. Yeah. And
Here we go.
oh, here we go. Yeah.
I have no wish to kill you, sir.
I'm not a knight.
I mean, and that's one of the biggest themes throughout the books too, the whole idea of real knights versus people who show knightly characteristics that aren't.
So you'll see. So Arya, like, thrusts her sword into Sandor and just pokes his armor. It doesn't do anything, And you kind of see the difference between when you have the strength for armor and a big sword. It's hard to beat someone with a little needle, And you kind of see that here in these fighting styles. That Rob Roy has this big, heavy sword that he's like lunging down with, and if he hits, he'll probably kill that guy. It's like, unless he's got Thoros Amir to resurrect him, that sword's gonna like plunge through the chest and just destroy him. But Tim Roth's character's quicker. Keeps moving, dodging, running. Rob Roy's getting more and more tired.
You had mentioned the parallel to Bron's scene in the Veil.
Exactly, same thing, right? Bronn just kind of stays back, conserves his energy, let the other guy wear himself down. No one gets smashed in the face. Not one time does someone get smashed in the face or a sword plunged through their body. They're just getting tired. And it slices. Now it's over, right? He's got him. What can he do here?
We can also talk about the dangers of monologuing that we see time and time again.
Very true.
Oberyn and Martell.
So this is a scene Julius Caesar.
Oh,
Sean picked it out.
wilt thou lift up Olympus,
You'll see some
Caesar?
parallels to
Brutus, bootless kneel. Spear, hands, for me!
This character that's respected, and he's a leader, but he's made some controversial decisions, and eventually his allies aren't having it anymore. Caesar is doing that they're objecting to, Yeah, and crossing the Rhine, he's like just this long-held tradition, just this fundamental belief of the Roman people, and John's like, I don't know if we're going to do that anymore, Let's let the wildlings across, Everyone would be okay with that.
Do you want to do these things on the left?
Yeah. This time it will work.
I just thought maybe.
Could you access the file?
Yeah.
Otherwise, in our backup plan? Give us 1 second. We have an idea. Because we know we're going to run out of time if we have to play all these clips all the way through. So we might have another way to do this. While we do that, real quick, let me ask.
The proper course is
Does
clear.
anyone out there have
Hence fealty to
a
King
scene in
Renly
their
and
mind
Lord
like
South?
this was just like this? Anyone have a moment that happened in Game of Thrones you thought it was just like this other show that I saw? Anyone have something like that?
It was...
I had Rob Roy like in my head. I think
Yeah.
I was talking about it with him, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just noticed another callback to the scene with reading up about sleep and then popping up. Reminds me of Ned Umber popping up behind.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's an excellent catch.
Okay, all right, here we go.
Yeah. So this is King of the North season 2.
The dragons we bow to, and now the dragons are dead. There sits the only.
Realize that?
The first season.
Oh, was it first season?
Yeah.
No, it was the second season.
King in the North.
It was the second season.
It occurred to us when we were getting ready for this panel, thinking about
That's the last thing that happened.
movies and TV shows in the past that Game of Thrones was similar to. We realized that, well, after 8 years, Game of Thrones can be similar to itself, right? Like there's scenes that call back to their own scenes. So.
Yeah, especially the opening episode of this season.
Yeah, very much this season, which we started on this panel that hadn't even come out yet, but now like could have done a whole panel just on that. Yeah. Again, we apologize for this. We made sure this worked beforehand, and it did.
Okay,
Yeah,
Don't
it
worry
was
about
working
it.
great this morning before we plugged into an HD.
I mean to bend my knee.
So while we're going through some of these technical difficulties, like one thing that we didn't really dive into on our end, and I'm very curious if anybody in the audience is very into horror films, because very much like all scenes with the White Walkers and the Whites like definitely invoke a lot of like traditional like horror tropes. None of us on the panel are like, you know, horror film experts. I was just wondering if anybody out here was a horror film aficionado who could like maybe speak to some of the stuff that we've seen in the show.
Anybody? Nobody?
Nope.
No horror fans?
But the books themselves feel like horror in certain chapters of White Walkers. Like the prologue itself in White Walkers feels like a Stephen King.
Yeah.
Thing with like Sam like going through and taking so much stuff back from
They clearly take like broad inspiration from like that zombie
Yes.
horror movies.
Yeah. George is.
Days later type stuff.
Yeah. Well, George has actually said, because when he started writing the books in the mid '90s, like it was before that new wave of zombie film came out, and definitely like Night of the Living Dead and those zombie films were a huge inspiration to the Whites, for sure.
George is definitely a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, who is the godfather of horror. And,
Right.
And I kind of expected some scenes from The Thing, the John Carpenter movie, to match up to a lot of the ice in the background, but I'm not, wasn't versed enough in that to.
That's what the screeching zombie in
Yeah.
the last episode reminded
That's
me.
exactly what it does.
Oh, yeah? All right. Yeah, I watched The Thing 3 times. I'm really an expert on it, and I just knew that that's what they were drawing parallels to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We are good to go, I think. It's thinking. It's thinking. Oh, no!
Yes.
All right, so we're going to restart the program.
Is anyone here adverse about talking about previews for the upcoming season? Or for Sunday's episode, basically? So we've seen in some of the preseason trailers a scene of Arya, what we're assuming is running around the crypt.
The proper course
Very
is
evocative
clear.
to that famous scene
Take
in
fear to the
Alien
King
where
Red Lear.
Sigourney
The
Weaver is
Red
running
Castle.
around. That
I'm not-
scene was, it's a classic film school scene where we're actually breaking the 180-degree line, and it's evoking more of a sense of terror. You're never quite sure where you are. I'm expecting that scene where she's running around the crypts to be fucking scary as shit.
Fingers crossed, knock on wood, I think we got it.
Okay.
Iron Chair 2. The King in the North.
Am I your brother? Now and always. Now and always. My sword is yours, in victory and defeat, from this day until my last day.
The King in the North!
So they did a really good job modeling the next King in the North scene. Right after that one, we see a series of lords stand up and kind of make their case. And the last one pulls his sword, and everyone joins in.
There will be more fights to come. House Glover will stand behind House Stark, as we have for 1,000 years. And I will stand behind Jon Snow.
Are you?
The King in the North!
I didn't even catch the irony of there are people who don't actually stand behind him when it comes down to it. Yeah. But look here, you'll see in that last one, we saw this cut back and forth between Robb and Catelyn. Now we see the same cut back and forth between Jon and Sansa. Yeah, this sort of suspicion of what's going to happen now. I don't know about all this. It seems like such an inspiring moment, but you see these female characters concerned about the reality of where this is going to go, you know.
All right. Yes. So I would say go ahead and start playing. So this is probably the most famous scene from Godfather Part 1, the baptism scene. Right now, this scene is kind of a classic definition of parallel editing, where you're juxtapositioning two either simultaneous timelines or similar storylines. Like a stark contrast of like tone or concept. Stark contrast. You see what you did there. So he starts wide, and they very slowly kind of push in, and it starts setting a tone where, after watching the entire, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. You feel a bit of calmness from the actual scene of the baptism. And they did a very good job, obviously, like cutting together, where he's loading the guns, shooting the guns, the hands going through.
Sort of a ritual to it all.
Yes, ritual, music. This scene was definitely a very big tone to how it starts.
That baby's eyes turn blue.
And as I'm sure most people know, that's actually Sofia Coppola, the baby, the little baby.
Spiritus Sancti, Urexias et Cedes ab Bambum Dei Michaeli,
This being very traditional church music compared to the music that we're gonna hear. But the big thing about this scene is like not only is Michael becoming the godfather to his niece, but he is actually finally becoming the godfather.
Do you believe in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord?
I do.
Do you believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church?
I do.
So right now the pacing of the scene is becoming a little bit faster, creating a little bit more of an ominous tone.
Thrones too. It's also very dark.
Yes. Yeah.
From a lighting perspective, not a world perspective.
I'm really playing this through so I can show you the green special. Even the sound, the baby coming back, is kind of evoking more of a sense of dread. Poor Marguerite.
Think about how he's laying on the ground like Lancel.
Do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him.
The Mo Green special.
And all his works?
I do renounce them.
And all his pomps?
I do renounce them.
Yeah, essentially everyone's dead. Michael Corleone is now the one true king of New York Mafia. And the scene that very much would, the Godfather scene was very much an inspiration for our Septa Baylor scene from season 6. Yeah? 7, sorry. No, 6. I said yeah.
You mutilated him. You gave me your word.
Okay.
So we already have a little bit of action coming into the scene after Loris's trial.
Where is the Queen Mother?
But bouncing back and forth between Cersei and Tommen getting ready and the tension that's already happening in the
Go
set.
to Red Keep and show her the way.
And even though the music isn't traditional church organ music, it does invoke a little bit more of a spiritual aspect. And also the pacing of the scene kind of goes back and forth between slower cuts, quicker cuts.
The calmness of Michael and the calmness of Cersei despite this pending violent moment.
Get the others.
And Cersei becomes the leader of her house and threatens to top it.
Well, yeah, it's, where, Michael's becoming a godfather and the godfather. This is definitely the scene where Cersei is becoming the queen that she's always wanted to be. Even though there are obviously not as many scenes or, different settings where people are getting mowed down, it's still kind of, we're jumping back and forth between simultaneous timelines happening, and there's, spoiler alert, a lot of death. Yeah.
Elsewhere,
I think the Red Wedding, you could say, as a parallel.
what's the meaning of this? I was
I
told.
definitely would have liked, Pycelle to get, a knife in the
important
eye
things
to
to do
make
with
it,
my
a
time
true
with
Mo Green
Westeros.
special. That would have been.
I bear you no ill will. Please forgive me if you can.
The ravens crowing on the background is helping. Yeah. So, one thing I was, Miguel Sapochnik, who was the director of this episode, has very much said, The Godfather, multiple scenes in The Godfather, but specifically the baptism scene was, he felt the style was the best way to convey the story that he was telling. It's not a very Game of Thrones thing to be doing this intercutting parallel editing. But as he said in an interview, love the way things were intercut on those sequences, and although I knew that intercutting isn't very Game of Thrones, I felt this was the most effective way to tell the story. And one sense, I wonder how much of, I've never had like a sense of calmness anytime I've watched. I wonder how much of that is, you know, we know Cersei so well as a character. How much of it is because we've seen this style of editing before in so many movies, and we kind of know, like, when it's going back and forth like this, like, some shit's gonna go down at some point. It's like a very ubiquitous style of storytelling at this point. Also, how much of it is because we know Cersei to be who she is. I mean, unless you want to see his set blow up. Because it's pretty fun. Oh yeah, we can do Field of Fire. I'd go ahead and start playing. So, the very famous Field of Fire 2.0, not the Loot Train Battle, because we're not going to call it that. This is probably, as far as like the setting and the scenes, is the most Western of the movies that are.
We need to get the last of these
it's the most influenced by stylistic Westerns. John Ford was very famous for having Monument Valley not just be like a big backdrop for him, but it became like very characteristic. It became a character on its own in his films. We're not going to go too much into Westerns because we're, well, running out of time. So yeah, it was just, you know, Matt Shakeman had talked about, like, you know, he loves Westerns, he loves John Ford movies. Matt Shakeman, who did this episode, is probably one of the more as far as like Game of Thrones directors, is like doing like that more heavy-handed nods to his influences. There was that great scene between Bran and Littlefinger with the very direct, like, head-on shots, like extreme close-ups. That was very much from Silence of the Lambs. Like with Clarice and Hannibal Lecter first speak to each other. But we're going to focus more on the battle part of this.
Didn't they teach you that at fancy lad school?
It's almost there.
Well, I learned it when I was 5.
So,
I am reminded, if I may real quick, this scene has some similarities to a scene in the first season when Jamie and Robert and Barristan are trading stories about their first kill. And it's not as romantic as you envision it. There's a scene in The Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood when he's talking to a young kid who's just killed someone for the first time, and he kicked him, like, he's having a hard time living with it. You know, the reality of killing someone.
So I don't want to talk too much over this one because we're just gonna let this play for a minute and then we'll show you its strongest direct influence.
It gets loud also.
That's true.
And the music does add so much to how ominous it's getting.
Well, yeah, sound design. And how long it takes.
I also appreciate the courage and discipline of this Lannister army, man. This is like quite a force coming at them, and they stand their ground.
There's some good close-ups of our soldiers as they realize what the fuck is approaching them.
Get the Dothraki screamers for the first time I've seen the show.
Yes.
They do a really cool job. The show gets a lot of shit for getting stuff in the books wrong, but this part I thought was actually done really well.
It does look so much like a Western.
Yeah, invoking Westerns also. The horse coordinator had talked a lot about how she drew a lot of inspirations on it. The approaching this shot very specifically. And then,
I wish that Martin Lawrence could have been one of the soldiers on the ground. And when the dragon shows up, like, shit just got real. It didn't go the Michael Bay direction with editing and cinematography here.
This was definitely the largest amount of stuntmen they had for seen so far in the show. I'm sure it's going to be outnumbered pretty soon, but they lit like more than 50 men on fire at different points. If you watch the show, you watch like all the behind the scenes stuff, like they actually go into great detail about how they dealt with like all these men on fire. All the guys riding horses were like those saddles where they can do archery at the same time. It's pretty fucking cool. But you can like maybe
Good skip.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Even though we're not pulling up that specific shot, but that shot, when I first watched the show the first time and I saw that, I was like, oh, this is fucking Apocalypse Now. So now we are going to talk about Apocalypse Now. Or we can skip that. 3:30. So, very famous scene in Apocalypse Now. And again, we have the approaching horde, cavalry, and even just like the sound.
Sean was in the airborne.
Yeah.
Spears
a couple
and
times in
shield.
helicopters, but normally planes. I don't know if nostalgia is quite the right word.
So again, this was a scene that the director of the episode very much talked about. He was invoking during his scene. Even though we didn't play a whole lot of Danny on the dragon, we get a lot of the similar shots where Danny's up high and watching the destruction from the high angle.
The idea that this is just a level beyond what anyone would prepare. None of that is true.
Well, and that was the thing. That was the big thing. As far as like the Westeros we had, like they've never seen a dragon or never fought against a dragon. They actually focused mostly on the show from Jamie's point of view to like actually see the dragon attack. Because at this point, we've seen the dragon attack closely. From Jamie's point of view, is like introducing a new weapon of mass destruction. You know, how it did change the whole game. This is, you know, they're basically dropping napalm. Very similar, this right here is a scorpion that they were using.
Spotted a large weapon down below. We're gonna go down and check it out.
And then, yeah, I mean, at some point, I know you want to, like, keep moving along, but my fun facts about the movie Apocalypse Now, so this scene they shot with 8 cameras. It was a highly choreographed scene, but they shot it like a documentary, even though the planes or the helicopters were very well choreographed. They had 8 different cameras, and each time they did another take, they actually repositioned the cameras. And I believe Walter Murch was the editor on Apocalypse Now. I don't have the number in front of me. The movie on a whole, like for every minute of film, finished film, there was 95 minutes of film shot, which is outrageous. It gives me like palpitations, like thinking about like that amount of footage coming in. The average movie is like 20-1, so this was like 95-1. I believe the number for this particular scene was like closer to like 120-1. It's a lot, and then 8 cameras, each take being entirely different is mind-boggling. But yeah, they shot it like a documentary, even though like the action was well choreographed. They just kept moving the cameras, so it was it's a feat of editing for sure.
It's always a dominant thought in my mind when I'm watching the Oscars or whatever, and they're giving out the editing award. It's like best actor, and best director, and I guess we'll do editor too. Like that editor should be getting more credit.
Well,
film editors really make the movie.
We won't talk about the movie that won for best editing. Yeah. Editors were not happy about that one. Although
they might not always properly reward the right person, but in general, the editor should get more credit.
We actually figured that he just got an award for like having worked with Bryan Singer his whole career. Everyone finally was like, he was the editor who won Best Editing this year. He was the editor on Usual Suspects and did the music for Usual Suspects, which is still one of my favorite movies.
We're about out of time.
Yeah, sorry.
We got to get to yours.
We got 9 minutes. Okay.
9 minutes.
I'll be really fast. These are pretty quick, and I don't think there's a lot to be said. I will say I wanted to frame the context of what I was covering to just one episode. So I focus in on Two Swords, which is episode 1 of season 4. It's the first episode after we get the Red Wedding. I just think it's my favorite episode as far as pacing, what they cover. There's not a really wasted minute. We get introduction of Oberyn Martell. We have an awesome interaction between Jaime and Tywin. We have this cold open, which I'll play, and I think it's one of the best cold opens in the entire series. And it's Tywin forging ice, right? If you know, the context is it's coming right off of the Red Wedding. So here we have Tywin Lannister standing triumphant with this symbolic ancestral sword of House Stark being destroyed, similar to the power and really the line of House Stark. Catelyn and Robb now murdered, Arya in the Wind, Bran and Rickon are thought to be dead. So this is a very powerful imagery. For those, just a little inside scoop, this is the bald gentleman right there, Valentine Smith. He's the weapons master for Game of Thrones. We see him in an earlier season of Tommy Dunn as a barber in Winterfell. And then the music. So we start to hear the Reigns of Castamere, right? This is a new arrangement, and it's significant, primarily for the drums. If you listen to the drums, I believe the drums are very specifically meant to echo the music of another, basically Conan the Barbarian, 1982, which is the scene we're going to talk about next. We have the full scene, the forging of a sword, the molten sword coming towards you. You'll see here we have the bull pelt being thrown in the fire, but also in a second we're going to see Tywin's face illuminated by the fire and the shadow. You can see very similar cuts here in Conan in a minute. So now,
Quick note, by the way, Tyrion was whistling Reigns of Castamere when he came in to be handed the king. In the beginning of season 2, before the Red Wedding happened, they were planning that musical note already.
Yeah, there are a couple instances where Tyrion was whistling, humming that.
So in this, it's gonna basically fail, and then we're gonna restart it. And I'll talk about the Conan real quick. So it relates to Rebecca's scene. It's directed by John Milius, and I'm probably butchering his last name, but he was actually nominated for an Oscar as a screenwriter in Apocalypse Now. He also was part of HBO's program Rome, which I think is vastly underrated. And
Rome is good.
And here's something that I think is a cool tie-in. Rebecca said we're not going to talk about the books too much, but I do think the significance of it is important because the book that got George into fantasy was Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard back in 1964. So I don't think, I think it's a multi-level homage, right? I think, you have this fantasy film that was very popular at the time, and then it also, the book itself played a huge role in, in what he was trying to do, or George R. R. Martin's writing, and we see that reflected in Robert's character, right? His description, he's basically Conan the Barbarian reborn, not in the current timeline, but when you hear him described at the time of the Battle of the Trident, that is, it's striking, and if you were to go back and look at those passages, they're almost word for word the way it goes. Let's go back here. All right, here we go.
It is I. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
You have the sword being melted, coming towards the audience. This one. So I won't show this entire scene for the sake of brevity, but I did want to point it out because it is part of the reason I love this episode so much. And it's because at the beginning of the episode, we see the loss of a Stark sword, right? Yeah. And then at the end, the very last scene, we see Arya regaining Needle. So I like the, how clean that is, and how it comes full circle here. And the scene I actually thought that this reminded me of was a scene from True Romance, but the scene with Virgil and Alabama. What I found out was I was confusing the book scene with the show, and I think, and I wish I could have played it and read the thing, because it reads and plays very close to the. But when I started, Aziz almost talked me out of making this comparison. But we do have what I think is a comparison to this scene, and it's maybe my second favorite cinematic moment in movie history. So I'm just going to play this. So this is the Bronx Tale, right? And I'm just going to go down in parallels between this, specifically Sonny and C, and Arya and the Hound. So you have the Hound and Sonny, both killers yet likable. Hound and Sonny both have young pupils, and Arya and C. Both the Hound and Arya's reasoning for taking on the pupils is self-interest. Sonny's side, C saw a murder, and the Hound is trying to get some sort of reward or hopefully help himself. There is genuine fondness developed over time between Sonny and C, as well as Arya and the Hound. And I think that's really on display in this current season between Arya and the Hound. Arya and C's fathers have shit opinions of the Hound and Sonny. Arya and C are both taken down a darker path as a result of their relationship with Sonny and the Hound. Both scenes are set in a bar in a tavern. Both the Hound and Sonny are originally outnumbered. We have a baddie versus baddie versus we have the Mountains Men versus the Hound.
Oh, you again. That wasn't very nice. Now he's got to leave. I'll tell you when the fuck we leave, all right? Get the fuck
I wish there was some chicken. I wish there was a fucking chicken. And I think the dialogue, I mean, this is one of my favorite. Just this part.
Now you scared me. I will never.
To me, that's the moment where he says, where the Hound says, well, someone's gonna die, yeah. And you get this realization where Sonny and the Hound knew the score before everyone else did, and that's the moment when everyone else does. They also use stillness and the reduction of music in really cool, similar ways, but I wish I could have talked about that a little more, but unfortunately.
Yeah, we are getting kicked out right now.
Sorry.
If anyone wants to chat about movies, we're around all weekend. Don't forget to tip your bartender.